Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at today's webinar, Regulatory Compliance Solutions in Singapore. I'll hand you over to my colleague, Connie Wong. Thank you, Connie.
Thanks, Ali, and hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Connie Wong. I'm the Executive Director of Waystone based in Singapore. Waystone has over 20 years of experience in providing governance and compliance solutions to fund managers globally. Today, we wanted to take this opportunity introducing Argus team to our fellow industry friends and clients. Argus has joined Waystone in June this year and is part of our global compliance solutions team. I'm very delighted to have Sachin and also Nithi joining with me on this webinar. Before we get into the details, I would like to invite both of you to give us a brief introduction of yourself, and also Sachin, maybe you can also share a bit of the background on Argus and what we can do for the regulator fund managers in Singapore.
Thanks, Connie. Hello, everyone, and thank you for all joining this webinar. I really appreciate it very much. As some of you know, Argus specializes in the regulatory compliance for financial institutions. We are a regulatory compliance consultant. I'm the one who founded the firm in 2017. I have a business partner, Dipesh Agarwal, who joined me in the early stage of the business. And later on, Nithi joined us as a director of compliance. As a personal background for me, a bit of an introduction, I am a chartered accountant, being into the startup industry, being with the Argus, of course, 2017 when we started. Nithi is there for the last 2 years. And what we do in terms of maybe I take a pause and let Nithi introduce herself first.
Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, Connie. I'm very delighted to be here today and being part of this session. A quick background to myself, a compliance professional. Started off doing compliance in the banking sector. Then I moved on to do compliance for an in-house leverage FX CFD broker. And then I have since then joined a consulting company where I was there for 10 years, heading up the Singapore office. And I'm now part of the Argus team. I've been part of the Argus team for the last 2 years, heading up the compliance division here. And yeah, very happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you, Nithi. Maybe I will take it up and explain what Argus really do. As I talked about, Argus is a compliance consulting firm. We primarily focus to the financial institutions. Most of our clients are fund managers, and how we help them. We technically, what we do is we provide a very solution approach. And if I put it very simply, we take it as a cradle to nirvana as a solution. What the kind of a client, other than the fund manager, we have various regime in the financial institutions, which are again, could be financial advisors, could be payment service institutions, Forex trader, so on and so forth. How we provide our solution, it starts from when, if I take an example, if the client looking to establish its presence in Singapore, we will help them to set them up in Singapore. We help them to, build their licensing application, which again, Nithi will go into the detail for that. We do licensing application, we do compliance policies, processes. Once that is established, we do the ongoing compliance monitoring, provide internal audit, which is again very compliance focused, and we provide various training. We are again IBF recognized, and so our training financial institutions can take that and get the subsidy on it. So we cover that with the various topics. That's what we really, as a services, as a solution, what we cover. I think one of the things which I would like to highlight that which we proud about how our clients look at it. We provide them the 360-degree view of, or 360-degree in terms of how we cover our services. Given, Nithi coming in with the domain expertise, subject matter expert, which comes with the whole compliance knowledge. Dipesh, who's again the business partner, he comes with the front office kind of experience. He been a private banker before. He has managed the Forex trade, so he can do that. As you heard before, I was a CFO, I have managed the startups. So with that, I of course I ensure that the compliance risk governance matter are delivered efficiently, as well as the balance between the commerciality and the compliance is managed well. So this is how our unique proposition is. Of course, I will put it, one size doesn't fit all. We remain very focused towards what client is looking for. We remain very bespoke. We remain very bespoke, and we deliver the work as client would want us to do. So that's about it. Maybe Connie, you have some specific questions. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin and Nithi, for giving us an overview of yourself and also what Argus can support. I've been also, prepping for this webinar and also reviewing some of the statistics in the market, and we're all very much aware, in Asia, Singapore is a leading financial hub. And one of the number I want to share with the audience today is with a statistics shared by the MAS in Singapore, the asset under management in Singapore over the year, especially in 2020, rose by 17% to 3.5 trillion. So that's a really, a phenomenal number here. And a lot of the managers and globally, they're looking for setting up their presence in Singapore. So if Nithi, you can share with us, what are the different types of fund management regimes available in Singapore, and how does the regulatory landscape look like?
Sure, Connie. Maybe just to take a step back, Singapore financial institutions are regulated by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS as we call it, and it is the sole single regulatory body as well as a central bank in Singapore. In terms of fund management sector alone, I would say that there are altogether about 4 different categories of licensing or approval status that a fund manager could possibly fall under and be regulated. The first one is called the registered fund manager. Registered fund manager, Rfmc, as we also sometimes refer to, is not really a license, it's more of a registration. It is essentially to allow certain type of fund managers to get quickly regulated by the Monetary Authority of Singapore and to start fund management activities here in Singapore. What are some of the limitations for an RFMC? You can only deal with 30 qualified investors at any one point of time, and you can only manage assets up to 250 million Sing dollars. And you can only deal with accredited or qualified investors under the definition of the 30 only qualified investors parameters. So this is especially useful for startup fund managers who are not looking to grow that aggressively. They want to get a feel for the Singapore regulatory framework, and they're only targeting accredited or institutional investors. This is probably a good way to get started in the Singapore landscape. The next level up would be the capital market services license for fund managers dealing with accredited and institutional investors. So in this particular category, this is considered as the licensed category. The limitation for this particular license is that you can only deal with accredited or institutional investors. So this is not a registration, but it is the actual license that you can obtain. And then the one above that would be the capital market service license for fund managers, but dealing with retail. So there will not be any limitations in terms of the type of investors that you can deal with. And then we have the 4th category, which is the capital market service license, but for venture capital fund managers. That again is an attempt by the Singapore government to sort of create a lucrative environment in Singapore for VC-specific fund managers to be set up very quickly and start managing assets from here. So it has been looked at quite favorably. The licensing timeline and the process and the requirements are relatively easier to meet, and therefore we have seen quite a lot of interest in foreign fund managers looking to come to Singapore to be set up as a VCFM manager.
I think that's really useful for managers or some of the sponsors here on this webinar, knowing the available framework in Singapore with the 4 type of categories. And perhaps if you can also share with us what are the key compliance obligations for regulated fund managers in Singapore?
So I would say that in terms of the key compliance obligations, the fund managers generally, they have to comply with the Securities Futures Act, which is the main legislation here. And then there are subsidiary legislation such as the Securities Futures Licensing and Conduct of Business, as well as the Financial Margin Requirement Regulation. So the Licensing and Conduct of Business Regulation kind of stipulates the business conduct requirements that fund managers need to comply with. Of course, they change and they vary depending on the different types of fund management license or regulatory status that one falls under. The Financial Margin Requirement Regulation effectively states all of the financial obligations that fund managers would have to meet. For example, if you're a licensed manager, what is the base capital you need to maintain? What are some of the additional risk-based capital that you have to maintain? And can you reduce your paid up capital? These are some of the requirements that will be captured under that particular regulation. And then subsequent to that, we will also have various notices and guidelines and circulars. So again, notices would be quite prescriptive in the sense that it will tell the fund managers what are some of the, again, business conduct requirements that they have to meet. Breaches of any notices is considered to be a breach of a regulation. Therefore, there will be penalties. Likewise, if you do not follow what's in the Securities Futures Act and the regulations, it is also considered as a regulatory breach. And then the guidelines are issued and the circulars are issued sort of to give expansion on what's already stated in the notices, as well as in the Act and the regulation. Some of the key things that fund managers would have to look at in terms of, whether they are meeting the requirements, I would break it into two parts. One is the initial prerequisites. What do they need to fulfill in order to be regulated here in Singapore? And then the second part is looking at, the ongoing compliance obligations. How onerous is it? Do they need to set up large team of compliance professionals, for example? So maybe just quickly to touch on the initial first part, the prerequisites. I would say that for the Rfmc and for the license category, in general, you need to have at least 2 people on the ground here. And they have to demonstrate that they have at least 5 years of relevant experience in fund management. And particularly collectively, they have to show that they have experience in the asset class that the fund manager is going to do, as well as managing the operations in terms of compliance and operations. There are 3 categories of type of personnel that you need to have on the ground here. You need to have at least 2 directors, 2 relevant professionals, and 2 representatives. 2 individuals, if they meet all 3 category requirements, then they can fulfill all 3 hats and carry out those functions. There is a requirement to have a base capital of minimum 250,000. And again, if you are a licensed entity, there may be additional risk-based capital requirement that you have to meet. And then moving on from that, there are certain requirements in terms of fit and proper. Anyone that you hire and you present to the MAS in order to get the license, they need to show that they are financially stable, they are not bankrupt, they are credible, and they have good reputation effectively. And that representation has to be made to the regulator. And then other things will be looking at compliance. Expectation here from the MAS is that fund managers can outsource their compliance to a service provider like ourselves, so long as they're only dealing with accredited or institutional investors, and the assets that they're managing is under 1 billion Singapore dollars. So if you go beyond 1 billion, then definitely the MAS expects you to have an in-house dedicated compliance team or sufficient arrangements such that you get support from your related corporates, and having a senior person on the ground here providing some oversight. I would say these are sort of the key requirements. And then, of course, when we look at post-licensing, what are some of the things that fund managers need to look at? Definitely, there are a lot of requirements on continual compliance requirements on the individuals, which are the representatives of the company. These are effectively your portfolio managers, your business development guys, client servicing individuals. We have to ensure that, again, they are fit and proper, that they're not carrying out any misconduct during the course of their employment. There are requirements on AML and KYC. On the investor side, fund managers are ultimately held responsible for fulfilling compliance, even if you do outsource it to fund administrators to carry out some of the function. There are specific requirements in terms of, risk management. MAS has issued out various notices and guidelines specifically on technology risk management and cybersecurity. So fund managers overall need to put in place a risk management framework that addresses clients' risks pertaining to client assets, as well as operational risks that covers tech and cybersecurity. Besides those, I would say financial obligations are another aspect, which as mentioned earlier, fund managers need to maintain minimum base capital as well as financial resources. If I look at another area, which is part of business conduct, would be the filings and the notification requirements to the regulator. I wouldn't say that the filings are that onerous. Most regulated fund managers, if you are licensed, you have to do a quarterly filing to the regulator to indicate how financially viable you are and whether you're meeting the base capital and financial resources requirements. And then on an annual basis, you are also obligated to conduct an audit and submit relevant forms to the regulator. If you're an Rfmc, which is not the license category, there are particularly annual submissions that you do. You don't have to do any quarterly submissions. For any of the type of fund managers that you, fund management category that you operate under, there are lots of notification requirements, or rather filing obligations in terms of any changes that occurs within the organization or the individuals. There are specific timelines within which fund managers have to notify the MAS if any changes occur. For some license categories of fund managers, they also need to seek pre-approval from the regulator before they do certain compliance action points, like, for example, appointment of new directors, changes to the shareholding structure, for example. So I think, in general, Singapore is not very different to the other regulatory market, I would say. We have, good standards here. We are a FATF member country, so our legislation and framework pretty much meets the global standards.
This is good to hear, and I know, Nithi, you mentioned as part of your conversation that compliance outsourcing is possible. So based on your experience, I know you have dealt with a lot of the managers as well as dealt with the regulator. What you see as a market practice and how Argus can help with helping the managers navigating all this regulatory compliance landscape.
In terms of the market, what we see for the asset management sector, there are more than 400 asset managers on the ground here. Majority of the registered fund managers, they have outsourced their compliance to firms like ourselves. And then within the license bucket, where you have those dealing with accredited institutional investors, you have the retail investors, and then you've got the venture capital fund managers. Most venture capital fund managers, again, they outsource their compliance to firms like ourselves. Those dealing with accredited institutional investors, again, they also outsource compliance to firms like ourselves. Having said that, we do have lots of clients where they may have in-house capabilities. They may have a person who is overall looking at compliance obligation. They still, have us come on board to supplement and be an additional resource to that in-house person. And that happens for a number of reasons, mainly because, it could be a one-man shop, or it could be a scenario where that person is also overseeing not just Singapore, but other offices around, other parts of the world. And therefore, they may not have enough sufficient capacity to really look at specific requirements in Singapore. So I would say that, majority of our clients see that there is no need to have an in-house person, and we are able to fulfill most of the function that they would need in order to fulfill the compliance requirements. And some of our clients do have in-house, and they have outsourced some of the function to us as well.
Okay, Thanks, Nathan. And it's also in line with what I've been seeing in the market as well. A lot of the managers, they rather outsource the compliance functions to a subject matter like ourselves and also yourself, who are able to support them while they also retaining their resources in towards their investment activities. So this is continued to be a trend that we are seeing not only in Singapore but also around the globe, and hence we have put together a global compliance solutions in place supporting the managers who are looking to set up their shop or their outfit in Singapore, as well as for the managers in Singapore, they're looking for support locally. So I guess it's very much helpful. Nithi, you have shared all the existing or maybe the current regimes and also the regulatory obligations within the industry. So maybe just to wrap up the session, if you can also give us a few areas that which is happening, or maybe a new regulations that some managers need to take note of, which is going to be effective in 2021 or maybe going forward. That would be useful for the managers here today joining us.
Sure, Connie. So there are a couple of new regulations that will kick in this year. The first one is the Individual Accountability and Conduct Guidelines. So this is very similar to the individual accountability regime based in the UK as well as in Hong Kong. I think that Hong Kong is called a Senior Manager Regime. That is effective as of September, actually, on the 10th of September. So fund managers would have to have the appropriate policies, procedures in place to make sure that they're able to fulfill the requirements under that particular guideline, which essentially focuses on, making sure that senior management team and key risk professionals, personnel within the organization are responsible for the job function that they're carrying out, and that there's a proper channel and a way to monitor their activities and whether they are meeting their responsibilities and how they are being remunerated as well, whether that is in line with their responsibilities. So that's coming up. And then earlier around June, there was also the guidelines on environmental risk management that was issued. Again, that is particularly for the asset management industry. That is, although the guidelines has been issued, fund managers have 18 months of transition period to comply with it. Again, the focus of that particular requirement is to look at fund managers and how they are looking at environmental risk as part of their overall portfolio risk management function. So now fund managers have to incorporate environmental risk factors into their investment portfolio management function to adequately, factor that into the overall risk management framework that they have put in place for the organization and at the fund level. Again, that is something that fund managers have to look at how they can potentially incorporate risk factors into their overall investment strategies and how they're going to report that back to the investors. Earlier this year in January, MAS issued the Technology Risk Management Guidelines, and that was quite comprehensive, which basically goes very much into the depth of how regulated financial institutions have to have appropriate controls in place to monitor technology risks and address them adequately, including the need to do penetration testing if required, having the appropriate data control mechanisms within the organization. So I think these are the three key legislations for this year. And then slightly before this year, we also saw the requirement on the accredited institutional investor opt-in, opt-out regime that was introduced. So that was not this year, but the year before, but it's still fairly new. So basically for that requirement, we have to ensure that fund managers, when they're onboarding customers, especially if you can only deal with accredited or institutional investors, you have to ensure that you have appropriate procedure in place to get the accredited institutional investors to opt in to be treated as one. And then if somebody wishes to opt out, and be treated as a retail investor, that's also something that you have to enable within your framework. Yeah, Connie, I think that's pretty much some of the regulatory requirements that I can share.
Thank you, Nitya. I think you gave a very comprehensive overview of the incoming regulations that's applicable to the fund managers in Singapore. And I do appreciate, your time and also Sachin's time this afternoon sharing with us some of the requirements and also the landscape in Singapore. I found it really useful, and I'm sure the managers today dialing also have the same feeling as myself. So I know we might have some questions we wouldn't get a chance to address during the session, but we're happy, to reach out after this webinar to each of you individually and also to address some of the questions you may have. And again, we will be also sharing Argus contact and also our presentation slides after this session. And we do welcome, anyone, if you are interested in knowing more about how Argus team can support you, do feel free to drop us a line and reach out to the team where we're more than happy to help.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Connie. Thank you for organizing this session as well. And as you have mentioned, we'll be happy to take any questions anyone has and address them after this webinar.